Fáilte. Welcome to the Village Oak Tree. I'm your host, Terrance Ó Domhnaill. Thank you for joining me again this week. I'm in a bit of a quandary this week because there's so much going on in the news that I don't want to just parrot the mainstream media. So let's talk about the overall decline of the United States under the helm of Trump and his government full of thugs, rapists, domestic abusers, and outright nut jobs. So gather around, sit you down somewhere comfortable for a bit as I vent a little bit about the United States as compared to the rest of the world now and what that is looking like more and more for the average person living in the US and some of its used to be closest allies. Almost everyone around the world is aware of the United States and all the trouble Trump and his evil minions are causing globally right now. But that's not what I want to talk about this week. I want to focus on the effect that's having on the average person caught in the crossfire, not just in the United States, but all across the planet. Trump, with his senile stupidity, has managed to affect nearly all of us in one fashion or another, and none of it for the good. The most obvious of these edicts has been the ignorant decision to go after Iran. That in itself will soon cause a global recession. The whole global economy is teetering on the edge of a cliff that Trump pushed us all to. And when I say us, I'm talking about in a broad sense of the countries that are heavily dependent on fossil fuel products that come from the Persian Gulf states. It's a lot more than just crude oil for the world's refineries. By shutting down the Strait of Hormuz and now a Houthi ban on Saudi shipping through the Red Sea, this headlong push towards a global recession is now reaching breaking points in the weakest nations, Japan ranking at the near top of that list. If Japan's economy falls, and other small nations will likely follow like a stack of dominoes, spilling towards the point where the larger economies will eventually falter as well. China is rapidly positioning itself to be one of the last ones to take any serious hits, but even they know what a global recession would do to their robust economy eventually. They know they're not immune despite all their preparations. The United States will be hit hard once the dominoes start falling. Not that the U.S. is heavily dependent on Japan for imports or even a large export market. It's their U.S. Treasury and bond holdings that they need to worry about. Japan, because they have been largely a vassal state since the end of World War II, has bought a very large amount of U.S. debt over the years, and it's come back to haunt them. Now, because of the global economy shrinking due to Trump's war, they're aggressively starting to sell off their U.S. bonds to save their economy. And they're not the only ones. The United States is heavily overextended on its credit accounts, and Trump, along with his MAGA Republicans, don't seem to care too much about doing anything about it. In fact, if Trump can figure out another way to siphon off even more of the taxpayers' money into his personal accounts, he will, without hesitation. Republicans are too scared of him to do anything about it. The thought of losing their political power is more important personally to them than standing up to the president and telling him no. His threats of influencing election primaries has most of them scurrying for the dark corners like cockroaches when the lights are turned on, which goes to show the average voter what kind of person they voted for to represent them in their districts. Cowards. They're all cowards. Their jobs and the power that comes with it mean more to them than doing the jobs they were elected to do. That applies to the state legislatures as well. We're watching this like a stage play in the United States as these cowards fight to prevent the ever more popular Democratic Socialists enter election races around the country. The wealthiest, elitist, established Democrats are becoming afraid of losing their jobs, as if keeping that job has become an addiction of sorts. Maybe it has. It's the lure of huge amounts of donor money that comes with elected offices nowadays. When corporations and nation states are allowed to throw millions of dollars at politicians to influence them at the expense of the average person just trying to live a stable life, the lure of all that money is too much to turn away from most politicians. That's why they work so hard at convincing the voters in their districts to vote for them in the first place. There are a handful of politicians who are standing up to be counted by their constituents, but they are vastly outnumbered by those whose only reason to be a legislator is for the money to be made on the side bets coming from corporate donors. Right now, in 2026, the majority of these courageous politicians are declaring themselves to be members of the Democratic Socialist Party. Senator Bernie Sanders can go to his grave happy that he has started a new political movement that will likely outlive him. That's a good legacy to leave behind. Not that he's going anywhere anytime soon, but still. In the meantime, the world is going to have to weather the coming storm. I watch a lot of very informative economic and financial podcasts on YouTube, and they are pretty much predicting a global recession. How bad it will get is yet unknown, but it is coming soon. Most of the predictors are saying that there's a high probability for next year. For the countries of the Western alliances that Trump and company are trashing right now, it's going to hit them hard. Europe is flailing around like a fish half out of water because they've lost the support of the U.S. under Trump. Germany is moving towards a wartime economy to try and salvage its economy. They tried that a couple of times before back in the last century, and we have horrible history lessons of how that worked out, or rather how it didn't for the Germans. It also applies to the rest of the EU bloc as well. France is struggling hard to keep its economy afloat while trying to manage its debt burden and failing. The same can be said for a majority of the rest of the EU bloc countries. Picking a fight with the Russians is definitely not the smartest thing to do, but they can't seem to get their heads on straight and come up with a plan to salvage their economies. I personally don't see the economic benefit to using taxpayer money to turn the failing Volkswagen factories into manufacturing war materials. That usually only leads to one thing. If Western Europe goes to war with Russia, it will be the end of things as we know them today. There's an open-ended question as to whether the United States would help, given how they're treating their once allies in the NATO. After the disastrous year they had last year with Trump's tariffs, and now France being snubbed by the Yanks in the UN Security Council this week, the handwriting is on the wall. And this is the news article that I pulled up that talks about that. And there were a couple more. The EU knows this under the surface, but they are too afraid to admit it publicly, at least not very much anyway. I see snippets of commentary about this from the European news outlets once in a while, but they are few and far between. Notice Netherlands' Mark Rutte has been pretty quiet lately with regard to sucking up to Trump anymore. I think he learned his lesson finally. So has the EU Council as a whole. They're quietly trying to move on without the United States, and they have forgotten how to swim on their own. They want to survive. They had better learn to swim for themselves pretty quickly if Europe is to survive the recession that's coming for everyone across the globe. Trump is clueless to what he's doing to the global economy. Actually, he just doesn't care, and that is very obvious. Let's dwell on what a global recession will look like for a minute or two. We also have to add in the coming El Nino that's shaping up in the Pacific Ocean right now. This weather event will have a huge impact on geopolitics very soon. There are already typhoons devastating Southeast Asia and China right now, which may only get worse in the coming months. On the other side of that are the massive heat waves in Europe right now, along with the huge wildfires in France and Spain and Canada, and some on the western coast of the United States. In North America, there have been intense heat waves, and as I mentioned, wildfires, and we're seeing tornadoes hit the northern plains regions right now in July. As far as what the recession will look like soon, we can use some history to show us what that will probably look like. Then you add into the mix the current geopolitical landscape around the world. Most of us remember what the recession of 2008 looked like. Some of us are old enough to remember the 2000 dot-com recession, and fewer of us remember the oil recessions of the 1970s. The next one is being predicted to be much worse because the United States economy right now is being propped up largely by the tech industry, and China is rapidly defeating that hyperinflated balloon with their recent AI models and their ability to meet or surpass the West memory chip making monopoly. I wrote in my blog last weekend about my own troubles trying to buy a solid-state hard drive for a computer in my repair shop. American and Korean memory board prices are going through the roof right now because of the Chinese competition and the attempt by the U.S. to monopolize the market. China has started making their own chip presses in-house now, which means that that Dutch company that had a new monopoly on making the presses for everyone around the world is losing sales and profits dramatically. Once China becomes self-sufficient with being able to make their own memory chips for their data center servers and creating AI structures that surpass those in the US for a lot less money, it will be game over for the Western countries. The Western tech industries will collapse when sales drop dramatically and take their country's GDP down with them. That's what's coming. All these Western, especially American tech corporations will collapse without the hyperinflated profit margins they're running right now. They are all so far in debt that once their sales drop off around the world because of the Chinese, they will collapse like a house of cards in the summer breeze and take their country's economies with them. The United States and the other Western allied countries are already experiencing the beginnings of this recession because of Trump's war with Iran. The price of petrol and diesel have remained high since he started the petty war at the end of last February. Oil and gas prices ebb and flow depending on when Trump decides to throw more munitions at the Iranians or not. And the Iranians, and now the Houthis, shut down their respective geographical choke points. The U.S. is at the point of no return. They don't have enough money to make more bombs and missiles to throw at the Iranians, much less maintain their export contracts to other countries anymore. And they've expanded their arsenal, although Trump says otherwise. They, like a lot of other countries, I say they expended them. Let me make sure you understand that. The United States and some of their allies have expended their arsenal, although Trump says otherwise. They, like a lot of other countries around the world, have expended their stockpiles of oil to the point of collapse. China is using a war of economics to defeat the once mighty United States, and they're winning so far. Unless the U.S. can pull a rabbit out of their proverbial hat, they will collapse the American economy very soon. As I said, we already know what that's going to look like to a degree. Gas prices will skyrocket even more than they are now. Back in 2008, I remember buying gas at $5.75 a gallon, at its peak, which will make the other food and commodity prices rise up exponentially, just like they did back in 2020, 2008, 2000. With the average American already on the ropes economically, the rage will become even more than what the government can manage without more violence, which could exacerbate the violence even more, as a lot of people will be beyond caring anymore. They won't have anything else to lose. The current sitting government could see a complete changeover into something else. Whatever happens in the near future, one thing is a certainty. The United States has been forever changed by Donald Trump. There's no going back to what was. That's all been torn up by Trump and his fascist policies. The only way is forward into something new that could turn dark. Or the citizens could usher in something better that puts the people first instead of the corporations, which is what the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution intended when they decided to break away from the British Empire. That's very obviously been subverted in favor of the oligarchs over the last 100+ years. The oligarchs from the 19th century have been resurrected once again. Only this time, the U.S. has a president who's an active member of that exclusive club. He's all in on making as much money as off the poor as possible for as long as possible. I personally think that a reckoning is coming very soon. And I don't mean at the voting polls in November. I think it will come next year once the tech industry collapses under the weight of all that debt they've accumulated and they take the U.S. economy down with them. Once the Democrats take over the government later this year, I think they'll be so busy arguing amongst themselves about how best to take down Trump's government that they won't see it coming. Kind of like not being able to see the forest for the trees. Then, like so many times when previous recessions hit, they'll be so surprised and come up with more knee-jerk reactions to solve the problem. We've seen this before, and it didn't matter which party controlled the government. Meanwhile, the rest of us will have to suffer through another major recession for a couple of years or so or more, as someone works to come up with a recovery plan. Given the current global debt crisis being what it is, there is no one left to bail the U.S. out anymore. The United States has lost its ability to borrow any more money from the rest of the world to resurrect their economy. They're all as heavily indebted as the United States, and in some cases, more. So no, the United States will never be the same again after this recession. They can't borrow their way out of this one like they did in 2008 in 2020. There's no one left to borrow from now. That and Trump has expended all the political capital the U.S. had with other nations of the world and is even considered adversarial in some places rather than a trusted ally. This time when the recession hits, the United States is going to find themselves all alone in the world. And that will be the end of the American empire. Whatever emerges on the other side of the recession won't be the United States everyone remembers. I can't predict what that will look like because human nature being what it is, things could go either way. Look at what happened to Ukraine when they were convinced to chase out their pro-Russian president back in 2014. The same thing could very well happen in the U.S. under the right circumstances, and Trump was working hard to funnel everything in that direction. Russia and Ukraine could be the models for the new United States that emerges from the next major recession. Think about that. Think real hard about that as we watch the open corruption from Trump and his oligarch cabinet secretaries every week. They don't care that we know what they're doing because they truly think they're above the law. And so far, they have been. We're outraged, but no one is brave enough to stand up and say no forcefully enough to stop them. Most certainly, this cowardly Congress is cowering in their House and Senate chambers in Washington, D.C. So afraid of losing their power, they're willing to stay hidden behind closed doors and let Trump and company do whatever they want. Or in some cases, they're standing out in front of their office doors with their hats turned up, hoping that Trump will put some bonus money in it as they steal everything around them they can put in their grubby little hands. As long as they can hope for a piece of the action, they'll stand around with a shitty grin on their faces as the king walks by. Maybe if they bow low enough and grovel, the king will drop a couple of gold coins in their hats as he walks by. Is that the kind of government we want to emerge after the next recession hits? That's where we're headed if we don't do something now to stop it. It's obvious that the current Congress won't do anything out of fear of the king. Maybe it's time we start up a whole new Congress with some people that have a few more brass cojones. So that's all I've got to say. I mean, I told you I wanted to vent. So watch, listen, or read about my book during this next break. It's a cautionary tale about what the future could look like if we leave things the way they are. When I come back, I have a poem from an Australian woman and her husband from down under that aptly fits into this week's narrative. I want to take this time to show you my book, tell you what the story is about, and explain how you can get one to read. By 2031, the American experiment has failed. A theocratic coup has transformed the United States into an authoritarian state. White Christian nationalists control the government. Millions of non-white immigrants and citizens have been forced into labor camps or driven into exile. The Constitution is void. The economy has collapsed. And the country that once promised freedom now hunts anyone who remembers what that word meant. Dr. James Naismith is a ghost in this new America. He's Pakistani American, Muslim, and on the run with a bounty on his head. James practices medicine illegally for the underground resistance and those on the run, treating fugitives and rebels and anyone else the regime has designated undesirable in this new country. His medical kit is contraband. His patients are criminals. His survival depends on staying invisible. But Dr. James isn't running to save himself. His two younger sisters have been incarcerated in a labor camp, and every mile brings him closer to rescuing them and escaping across the border, if they're still alive. While working in New York City, an unexpected reunion changes everything. Deanna, a woman from his recent past, offers him more than shelter and supplies for a night. She has connections with the underground, survival skills, and some military training learned from her father and brothers. With their skills and knowledge, she leads the escape from Homeland Security across upper New England towards a safe haven through dangerous territory and a fractured nation, igniting a simmering romance along the way. Together, they navigate a landscape of betrayal and surveillance, where allies can become enemies and every decision may have fatal consequences. The federal police are hunting them. The resistance network is fragmented, and the journey to safety may cost Jane more than his freedom. It may cost him his sisters. The powerful vision of democracy's collapse and one man's fight for family, faith, and a future worth living. A new, very possible future begins in Book 1, Fugitives in the United States. The rescue mission continues in Book 2, The Camps. Hopefully, we'll be out by early next year. This is a story for the times we now live in. You can get a copy through the many options I have available in the online store at credibatha.com. Online store, you can go through the website address with the QR code or in the banner at the bottom. I sell copies directly from the store, which ship out as soon as the order comes in, or with links to online retailers such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Ingram Spark, if you're okay with print to order. There are also many ebook distributors across the world where this book is sold as well. So go find yourself a copy and order one today. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Sláinte. All right, welcome back. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up, do a screen share, and I'm going to read this poem to you here. All right, now I'm going to scoot over and read this directly right off the page. Well, I thought I was going to. Hang on a minute. It timed out on me, so bear with me for a minute. All right, we got that all sorted out. Let me roll over here. In the title of her poem, There Will Be Times, O My Child, When It All Seems Hopeless, by Caitlin Johnston. There will be times, O my child, when it all seems hopeless. When the trees all have QR codes and the bank boys and Balrogs are holding all the cards. When your refrigerator tells you the Iranian people yearn for freedom and your electric shaver can smell if you've been reading Parrente. When you're on a first-name basis with the police surveillance drones and your colonoscopy screen in the exam room is running ads for Northrop Grumman. And it is true, oh my child, it is true that the machine is mighty and that its armor is very thick. It is true that the bank boys have long fingers and they are putting marbles in our minds. The sky is red and the moon has a for sale sign and parts of Palestinians are turning up in our tap water. But, oh, my child, do not be daunted, and, oh, my child, do not despair. There are forces within us the flock cameras can't see. There are depths within us not even the Balrogs can reach. Beneath all the doom scroll addiction psychosis, beneath all the oceans of trauma and toil, a creature is stirring and opening its eyes full of primordial deja vu, its eyes full of Big Bang recursions, full of eyes, watching eyes, watching eyes, watching eyes. It looks at you and you meet its gaze. Everything goes still. You remember what you are, oh my sweet darling child. You see it now. You see that this could never be contained. All right, it's pretty dramatic. I will give it that. So that's all I've got for you this week. Gora Mahagat, thank you for watching or listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed it. You'll return again to listen to me offer a voice to what a lot of people are thinking these days. To say goodbye this week, I'll leave you with this quote from Montesquieu. The tyranny of a prince is not so dangerous to the public welfare as the apathy of a citizen in a democracy. Slán go fóill.